Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists absolutely got it right. And even we're going to read a little bit today and talk about de Tocqueville, who got it right, especially in the introduction of his great work that he did. This is Tom Navolis, your host, and I am delighted that you are here with me again today, and that we're not going to get into a whole lot about the invasion of our privacies in relationship to the invasion into the Trump domain down there in Florida, the Mar-a-Lago invasion, if you will. I think that's covered a lot right now by the different pundits that are out there. And quite frankly, I'm just going to say one comment and then give you a reference in regards to that. And the comment is, I told you so. Told you so over the last 20 years, and in particular since 2010 when Obama came into office. But I told you so. There's many who have told you so, and especially those within the context of the Christian churches, the evangelical churches in particular. You've been warned, and yet there's so many that are still clamoring for the rooftops, expecting the great clouds to come down and rescue you off the rooftops, which I do not believe in that eschatology, so I want to be clear about that. Now, a good, a solid, a rational discussion on this, or someone that's presented well, that touches the Christian mind, a great thinker in that regards, is the reference that is in the video at the bottom of the screen or in the blog posting at samueladamsreturns.net, and pointing to the article that Pastor Doug Wilson has done on the Trump invasion. I think that would suffice for any reasonable person, any reasonable Christian to grasp all that has been going on in that regard. So I think from my perspective that this has been a rope-a-dope. I kind of titled the program today, the rope-a-dope. From that point of view is that you're being taken in and you're following on one jab, you're taking and you're looking, you're paying attention to that one motion that is going on, and all of that is everything in reference to January 6th as far as liberty assaults, and yet what you're missing is the major punch that has already been given, and everybody's so numb to it, especially believers in so many different ways are so numb to the punch that they're still observing the deflection. They're still observing that that movement that is distraction. The punch that was delivered severely to this nation, to everything that we've been talking about on the institution of a national religion, was clearly delivered with the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm going to be talking about that primarily in this first and third segment. In the second segment, I'm going to tie it into the component, especially from the United Nations relationship with the United States, in what does that mean from instituting this national religion with a full funding that also is absolutely in violation of original intent of our founders for our Constitution. So what I'd like to start with, before we get into that, is that if you have not read de Tocqueville in any period of time. Obviously, the large work that he did that for many years was kind of put aside. And that I was very interested in seeing that there are some universities out there that are actually taking and revisiting de Tocqueville because of the idea or his word usage of democracy. We hear that used a lot, even in the conservative circles, but the idea of democracy is not what America is. Many of you, I'm preaching to the choir, hopefully on this one, is that we're a constitutional republic. De Tocqueville does identify that, although his mechanism and discussion on democracy is in relationship to his home country of France. So we take that into consideration in his consistent use of democracy when, in fact, he should have more often used that of a republic, because France should have been a republic, but what was happening in his period during that 1800s when he was alive and traveled here, democracy was a big effort that was still coming about from the 1700s and the French Revolution. You still had that spillover. You didn't have the spilling of blood as much as you had the spilling of all of the political debacles that were still occurring in France and all over Europe in trying to look at what did that mean for the rule of the people within the context of some form of government. Well, I have to say that in my rereading of de Tocqueville and just going through, I think, his introduction, a lot of times we skip his introduction for a lot of diving to some of those other principles, which we'll talk about in the third segment, because quite frankly, de Tocqueville says that Congress will adhere to the Constitution until Congress figures out how to use the people's money to enslave them and to get them to keep re-electing the politicians. Is exactly what we have going on. But let's jump to this real quick on this introduction and what he has to say, just a couple quick paragraphs, and then we're going to talk about the debacle of the what do they call it? The Inflation Protection Act or Inflation Reduction, IRA. That's what I put in there. It's the rope-a-dope of the IRA religion. Anyway, whatever I have in the title, I don't have that in front of me at the moment. So de Tocqueville goes this: the whole book, which is here offered to the public, has been written under the impression of a kind of religious dread produced in the author's mind by the contemplation of so irresistible a revolution. And he's talking about the United States in this regard, which has advanced for centuries in spite of such many obstacles, and which is still proceeding in the midst of the ruins it has made. It is not necessary that God himself should speak in order to disclose to us the unquestionable signs of his will. We can discern them in the habitual course of nature and in the invariable tendency of events. I know, without a special revelation, that the planets move in the orbits traced by the Creator's finger. If the men of our time were led by attentive observation and by sincere reflection to acknowledge that the gradual and progressive development of social equality is at once the past and future of their history, this solitary truth would confer the sacred character of a divine decree upon the change. To attempt to check democracy would be, in that case, to resist the will of God, and the nations would then be constrained to make the best of the social lot awarded them by providence. The Christian nations of our age seem to me to present a most alarming spectacle. The impulse which is bearing them along is so strong that it cannot be stopped. But it is not easy, or at least so rapid, that it cannot be guided. Their fate is in their hands, yet a little while, and it may be no longer so. The first duty which is this time imposed upon those who direct our affairs is to educate the democracy, to warm its faith, if that be possible, to purify its morals, to direct its energies, to substitute a knowledge of business for its inexperience, and an acquaintance with its true interests for its blind propensities to adapt its government to time and place, and to modify it in compliance with the occurrence and the actors of the age. A new science of politics is indispensable to a new world. This, however, is what we think of least. Launched in the middle of a rapid stream, we obstinately fix our eyes and ears on the ruins which may still be described upon the shore we have left, whilst the current sweeps us along and drives us backwards towards the Gulf. So in describing this in relationship to what's going on in Europe in particular, he's really trying to tell us that there is a lot there that we need to be paying attention to back at that time. And that was all predictive. Most of what he wrote was very predictive, as well as what the Anti-Federalists wrote were absolutely predictive if we did not take and understand the fundamentals, and as he indicates even here, is what are the moral basis for what it takes to operate in this nation in such a manner that we would have equity that is in the natural revelations of what God has given us. So although de Tocqueville was not himself a very religious person, he was able to discern enough, even at that time, that there was a tie point there that Christian nations in particular needed to look at what were going to be the definitions of a moral society within the framework of even then trying to understand a democracy, maybe from the old ancient history, the Greek and Roman perspective of a democratic view, but then in a relationship to what happens in America as far as a constitutional republic. Well, we lost our churches being involved in helping define that over the course of the last 100 and some odd years, especially since the 1800s. So we're now the 1850s in particular. So now we're scrambling. We're scrambling in this idea that now that which de Tocqueville warned about, that which others warned about in the 1800s, in relationship to socialism and therefore then communism in 1848 with Karl Marx, we've seen that battle that has continued to go on. And it is critical at this time that we are able to clarify what is and are the moral definitions for governance within this constitutional republic. That's our battle. Now, what we'll get into in this next segment and finally in the third segment is the meat of the act that just occurred that is taking and not necessarily going to reduce inflation in any means whatsoever, but does continue to fund and institutionalize in a very unique manner the national religion. Now that's setting up a moral basis. Sam Adams and his cousin John knew differently, so come on back in the next segment. when Samuel Adams does return in such a way that truth must be known. See you soon. Welcome back to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists absolutely got it correct. This is Tom Navolis, your host, and we are going to jump right in to the interesting parts for this second segment in the relationship and funding of the national religion. And one of the key components of it that is now all part and parcel to the legislation passed through Congress this past week, and that being the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. And what does that have to do with religion, and how does that continue to drive on the institutionalization of a national religion? Well, I'm going to jump back over for just a little bit for those that think that talking about the UN and the UN trying to be subsume the United States, and what does that mean? As we've talked about over and over, it's not tinfoil hat stuff. So those that think it is tinfoil hat information, then you can either not listen to this segment, or you can take your tinfoil hat off and pay attention that there is a direct correlation between everything that happened. Now, you know, I've spoken on Agenda 21, which is now Agenda 2030. I've talked about the global establishment of environmentalism, so on and so forth. But to take and drive this home from a national religion being funded, I want to take you into this component of the United Nations of itself. You can find this in the references there at samueladamsreturns.net for today's program. And this is, in fact, from the UN Environment Program. So this is on the UN site and directly from them. And this is just on the About page alone. So right there in the banner, it says Faith for Earth Initiative. Got that? Faith for Earth Initiative. It says that spiritual values for more than 80% of the people living on Earth have been driving individual behaviors. In many countries, spiritual beliefs and religions are main drivers for cultural values, social inclusion, political engagement, and economic prosperity. That's in bold. I want you to understand those various components once again, because when you look at what's been happening, especially in the last 80 years in these United States, and in particular with the Democrats and then the Uniparty, that being the Republicans joining with the demons together, that this is what has been going on. And then go back to the first segment where I give you my encapsulation of de Tocqueville's quote about Congress taking and learning to bribe people with their own money. And look at these drivers. 80% of the people living on Earth have been driving individual behaviors. What? Spiritual values driving individual behaviors. We understand that. That's a biblical concept in so many ways. And then those spiritual and religious beliefs are the main drivers for cultural values, social inclusion, political engagement, and economic prosperity. So the United Nations is recognizing that spiritual beliefs and religion are the moving factors for everything in a society. Everything that we do, every life of a human is wrapped in that. Since this resolution in 2008, look at the timing for this particular resolution, and this is the one on Faith Earth Initiative. Faith for Earth Initiative. This was a resolution in the United Nations coming about in 2008 on, quote, promotion of interreligious and intercultural dialect, understanding and cooperation for peace," end quote, the UN General Assembly encouraged the promotion of dialogue among all cultures for promoting interreligious and intercultural dialect, tolerance, and understanding. Boom. And what do we have happening politically within the United States, especially from 2008, and then Obama comes in 2010. We get, some kind of a good, positive revalue direction underneath Trump for 4 years, and boom, now we have this continuation of Biden that is taking and driving into these whole things on the interreligious, intercultural dialogue, tolerance, and understanding, with no context of biblical truth, of the true living God, okay? So here's the mission: to encourage, empower, and engage with faith-based organizations as partners at all levels toward achieving the sustainable development goals and fulfilling the 2030 agenda. So this is what is key in this, is that it is taking and now bringing in, and we've seen the wokeness in the churches, whether it's any of them, the Catholic Church. I have a reference here, even from a secular Judaism site that is just all gleeful about the whole aspect of this IRA. Anyway, I'm going to use the IRA as what it is, because it is, and the whole vision then is a world where everything is in balance. Man of himself creates chaos. There is no way that humanity, even in this big political body, can take and create a balance. There's just isn't going to happen. It's going to be dictatorial. And anyway, we'll get into that. But in this whole thing, and here's something you can download, is the UNEP, which is this UN Environment Program, and the Parliament of World Religions, so that's part of United Nations as well, launch new book to catalyze climate action. And they're making a catechism out of it. So the UN Environment Program and the Parliament of World Religions today released a new book, Faith for Earth, A Call to Action, which gives readers a wide-ranging look at the history and diversity of faith teachings and their advocacy for the protection of the environment. So what's this have to do with the IRA? The IRA being that act that was just passed, and what does it have to do with anything in relationship to this whole the Inflation Reduction Act? I have a list. I mean, there's about 10 different references for you to look at in relationship to the breakdowns and where different people focus on different areas. And we'll be talking about some more of that focus in the third segment. But the area that I wanted to take and cover with you in particular is the area on the Green New Deal policies. One of the few organizations that actually choose into this well is that of the Heritage Foundation. They drive into it pretty nicely in talking about that there's $360 billion. There's actually, from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, which they're kind of pro and con on the whole thing. They actually break it out a little bit more, is that in energy and climate is $386 billion is targeted specifically for environmentalism, the new global religion, the new religion of the United States in its very fundamental way. So one of the first things is that we're seeing that it is a corporatist religion, if you will. It's tied to corporations. It's wrapped around money. It is taking and bringing in all of those leftist ideals and ideologies and fundamentals. So you have this clean electricity tax credit. What you do with that? Air pollution, hazardous materials, and transportation. That's $40 billion. The first one, the clean electricity tax credit, $161 billion. Individual clean energy incentives, $37 billion. Clean manufacturing, $37 billion. Clean fuel and vehicle tax credit, $36 billion. Conservation, rural development, forestry, $35 billion. Building efficiency, electrification, transition, so everything electric, $27 billion. Other energy and climate spending, who knows what that is, $14 billion. But here's something that's really new on this, that is a revenue driver, so they call, is that on methane-free, to get rid of the methane. And so part of that under this whole thing of 2030 and part of what they're doing under the Paris Accords is what we're seeing in Europe, is that get rid of the cows, get rid of some of the farming, get rid of anything that even produces natural methane, and you're going to be taxed on it. So we're going to have to see into the depth of the definition what that means for the cattle industry, for the milk industry, for any of the other meat and poultry producing industries that are also affecting what's going on in Europe. Now, when we take a look at what this is on inflation fighting, even the Congressional Budget Office and one of Biden's top economists are saying that this will have very, very little to do with making an effect around inflation whatsoever. So what we're seeing even out of the Mises Institute is talking about all of these policy changes that are going there. And we'll talk about the primary ones in the next segment. But on climate and energy provisions, that includes tax rebates and credits to lower energy costs for household, tax credits, research, loans, and grants to increase domestic manufacturing capacity for wind turbines, solar panels, batteries, and other essential components of clean energy production and storage, which is difficult, tax credits to reduce carbon emission, programs to reduce the environmental impact of agriculture, and more. That's going to be a key one. Reduce the environmental impact of agriculture. Because right there, you got to remember, you got all those tractors out there, all those diesels out there that are either preparing the ground for planting, that are then planting, and then are harvesting, and then on top of that is processing food. What's that all going to mean? I think that when we look at it, and we'll get into, because, I quite frankly, I had to transition to this compared to all of the minutia that I was going to put together for you to try and get to a finite detailing to show that the federal government is funding a religious principle. But with that, I wanted to take that from the UN's words themselves in how that ties into religion. And the fact that, yes, it is. It's pushing a international and religious perspective, utilizing, and I'll be honest with you, this is wrapping in and sucking in all of these other denominations and pseudo-religions that are out there into this whole godless environmental movement. They've been doing it for decades, since the 70s, in fact. Well, that's contrary to what our founders intended for this nation and what it really means for a constitutional republic. So come on back in the third segment as we get into some more detail on this particular act. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they did get it correct, and this is Tom Navolis, your host, and we're going to jump right into it in a moment because I am going to ask those, especially in the St. Louis market, that if you're finding any value in this programming, that you would please go to samueladamsreturns.net, look at all the archives that are available to you there, look at the potentials of my books that are there and available for you as well. But most of all, to keep this program going, there in the St. Louis market, we really do need some folks to contribute and to help us keep this on. Not going to be able to do that, and quite frankly, maybe you're not interested in this programming. So with that, I do thank those that are interested and are willing to contribute. So let's just jump into it. The Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. Now, the IRA, from my point of view, is once again there to push ideology. And as I talked about in the last segment, the second segment, please go there to take and check that out at samueladamsreturns.net. It is funding, a very, very big component is funding the national religion. And I explained that in the second segment. But what I wanted to get to here in this segment is a very good article from a financial site that I like to follow, and I think it's a good site, is Zero Hedge. And Tyler does a fabulous job in a lot of the different articles that he puts together and how he does an analysis from many of the other periodicals and articles that he puts together. So who are the winners? You know, everybody is touting that it's supposed to be an inflation reduction for we the people. Well, not really. It goes to especially in those fine details of what cinema jumped on and what's important to her and what was important then. Why did none other than Manchin or Manchin or however you pronounce, I pronounce it Manchin, and cinema, why did they give in? What was the negotiations that really set this forward? And if you haven't looked at this article, again, it's there in the references at samueladamsreturns.net. Follow the money. De Tocqueville, Congress, the Senate, Congress in general, taking and being able to bribe the people with your own money and bribing the people with your own money to substantiate those things that, number one, will take and continue and develop and build on the national religion, and secondly, to take and give those in the financial services mechanisms a way to keep their wealth. Wait a minute, Tom, that's not what it's supposed to be. So we look at this and we see that here's a quote. The entire contents of the bill were essentially cherry-picked by Manchin and then tweaked to fit cinema's preferences, according to this particular report. Now, those two are the big winners, and here we're going to get into the details of this article on how were they the winners. The two were able to score direct benefits for their states. Manchin securing an agreement to permit the completion of the Equitrans Midstream Corporation Mountain Valley Pipeline. Wait a minute. I thought Biden and his lefties were against pipelines, energy. How does that work? You have to go and take a look at what that's all about. And then they're going to slam us with methane and other carbon taxes? Wow. But to finish that. And for cinema, was able to secure, get this, $4 billion in drought relief for the western states. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, ladies and gentlemen. So the IRS and the green agenda, which we talked about in the last segment, being especially the green agenda being the national religion, gives $80 billion to the IRS over the next 10 years to expand its audit capabilities and upgrade some technology and hire a whole bunch of folks. Now, they're saying they're only going to target the wealthy, but why do you need 87,000 agents to do that? I mean, I think somebody calculated it out, and I'm probably going to misquote it. That means one agent for every 200 and some taxpayers. One agent for 200 and some taxpayers. I think that's kind of ridiculous myself. So the electric car makers, they get an extension of their popular $7,500 per vehicle custom tax credit for their EVs. Solar, hydrogen, they get, especially two particular companies, benefit a generous tax credit, while operators of nuclear reactors, what they do is they benefit from $30 billion production tax credit. Now, I like nuclear energy. I think that's solar and wind are garbage. They're absolute garbage. That's where these people are taking and making millions of dollars and can't produce sufficient energy. Nuclear can produce a lot of good, clean energy. But 87,000 agents, IRS, baloney. I don't have time to get into the Medicare, Obamacare, what that's all about, but it's in your references. It's there so you can see the numbers don't work. And extending that for just a minuscule number of people, you know where this is really going to go to? It's going to go to illegals. It's not going to go to anybody that really needs it. It's to fund medical insurance for illegals. So, where do we really go with some of this? It is for the hedge funds. It's for a lot of the financial institutions are the ones that are taking and benefiting from even this supposedly a tax on these types of financial institutions. Ain't going to happen, folks. It's just not going to happen the way that people think it's going to happen. It's just ridiculous to even believe that you're going to see the rich get taxed and businesses get taxed. The huge area that the huge policy shift that they were talking about that is going to try and really impact the financial world isn't going to do it. It's actually going to benefit them in so many different ways. I mean, you're seeing that they're talking about cracking down on the wealthy, the tax cheats, that there's a lack of adequate enforcement. That's why you need these 87,000 people, because this is, going to go after people earning $5 million or more. Really? I mean, that's why they invaded a former president's house as well, right? I just can't believe it. That the tax code is going to get better because the corporate tax avoidance with a 15% minimum tax for corporations that have at least $1 billion in profits annually. So now, you're going to tax these corporations. Ladies and gentlemen, any type of corporate tax, if you don't understand truth, gets passed on to you and me. Corporations never really pay taxes because one way or the other, the consumer is the one that actually pays the tax. So taking and trying to look at how that is going to fight inflation, everybody's admitting it's not going to drive down prices for anything. So they're saying the Inflation Reduction Act is to cut deficits, to build fair tax code and reduce pollution while directly lowering energy and healthcare costs. Well, even the CBO, that is the Congressional Budget Office, says, not really, not totally true. So when they're looking at all of this, and there's so many charts, so many tables here that I have for you, the fact of the matter is that we're going to end up with stagflation, where things are not really going to do what everybody expects it to do. So we'll see. It's going to be very interesting as we continue to drive through all of this and look at how this money is being spent. And we have to go back to both de Tocqueville in this case and even to Bastiat, is that you cannot take and spend your way out of problems. And this is what the anti-federalists were talking about as well, is that government, the federal government, would get way too large. It would take and start taxing everything that anybody owns, all the way down to your bathroom utensils, ladies, as I always talk about, as well as men, to all of your beverages and your wines and beers and even your baseball, basketball, all your games. You pay for extra taxes on your tickets. All your various forms of should be legal enjoyment. That's not what the federal government was designed to do. Our Constitution very much so limits what this federal government should do, but obviously you don't care. Obviously, you keep electing those. They keep bribing you with your own money, even for all of the environmental things to make it safe. And then you're probably hearing, if you're in a large established denomination, that it's your responsibility, according to God, to take and protect the environment. There's a difference between stewardship and the national religion, the global religion of environmentalism. It's all about money anyway. It's follow the money. So what do? Well, first off, I would highly recommend that you take and understand your state constitution. I highly recommend that you understand federalism and what does it mean from our constitutional perspective of a republic, that you elect local politicians into office that understand those fundamental principles as well. I don't give a hoot about the federal any longer in respect to what they're doing. What we need to do is look at your state canceling, if we want to use the language of the left right now, we want to cancel what the federal government is doing at the state level by saying no to all that money that they are throwing out there, $30 billion for local government. Local government should say no to the federal dollars. Schools should say no to implementing CRT and transgenderism and all of that. Geez, when are you going to learn to say no and understand to act as Sam Adams and the Anti-Federalists wanted to act, as a constitutional republic with your states being number one? Come on back next week as Samuel Adams, those Anti-Federalists, will return.